Shabbat Shalom. It's Friday again, and this time Parashat Vayigash. In our parasha, the Jewish people go down to Egypt. This is the very first exile. Indeed, you could argue that they aren't really a people, a nation yet. Indeed, they will only become a nation, Am Yisrael, in Sefer Shmot, when they actually grow to be the size of a nation. At the moment, they're still a family. We find the people going down, 70 people going down to Egypt, rather, maybe 70 men with their wives and children. But nonetheless, it's still the very first exile of sorts of the prototype of the Jewish people. And as we well know, Ma'aseh Avot Siman Lebanim, what the fathers do, the sons will repeat. And in this case, just like Yaakov and the forefathers, the Shvatim went down to Egypt, their tribes will indeed be in Egypt for the next few hundred years. But I think this parasha also addresses a certain question of, well, if we are in exile, what are we supposed to do in exile? What is supposed to be our sort of response to the Jewish people outside of its land? If we think about it, the Jewish people were given a land. They were given the land of Israel. And this is before it was the land of Israel. They were given Eretz Canaan. As Abraham is told, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'maladcha u'mibet avicha, go forth from your home, from your household, from your birthplace, to El haaretz asher areka, to the land that I shall show you. And Hashem gave him, indeed, Eretz Canaan, this land of Israel, this land of the Canaanites, that will become Abraham's and his descendants' land forever. Achuzat olam. But what happens when we leave it? What happens when we're taken out of that land? How are we supposed to behave? How are we supposed to kind of figure out life outside of the land of Israel? I like to use an example that probably some of the younger viewers here might not necessarily recognize as much, but the older ones for sure will, definitely the ones of my generation. When I was growing up in our house, we had a phone, a landline in the house. And it wasn't one of those phones with, with a receiver that went into the thing. It was, a little slightly more modern looking stick phone that sat in a little base. And it was a, cordless phone that you could take around the house, wander around the house. And you had to remember to put it back in its base, because if it left its base for too long, it would run out of charge, and then you would have no phone, and you'd have to, run around the house trying to find it, and it would be a whole business trying to press the buttons, having it beeping around the house, and so on and so forth. The phone does work when it's not in its base. That's the whole point. You can take it as a hands-free phone to a certain degree, and I remember people walking around the house with a phone under their thing, just walking around doing things. But you always had to remember to put it back at some stage. I think that might be a good mashal, a good parable for the Jewish people. The Jewish people are a cordless people. They are able to be taken around. You can detach them from their home base, from their land, and you can take them all around. Take them to Egypt, take them to Babylon, take them to Europe, take them to Australia, take them to wherever you like. But unfortunately, the longer they are away from their land, from their home base, the harder it is to charge them up. And at a certain stage, they do need to be brought back to their home base. So they are really supposed to be used within the vicinity, especially in their home base. The Jewish people have been through many exiles, and each exile has its own challenges. But I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to exile is the problem of recognizing the challenge itself. As they often say, diagnosis is half of the cure. When we come to the first exile, we see that the Jewish people immediately forgot that they were in exile. How can you tell that happened? And by the way, this is a challenge that faces every exile. Every exile, the Jews say, this is the place where we can stay. This is our new home. This is our new home base. And the answer is, no, it's not. It's really not your new home base. And time again, the Jewish people have made this mistake in thinking, now we found the place. Now we found where we can actually live and settle down. And this is going to be a comfortable place. And we always seem to forget, even though we might repeat and pay lip service to the idea of, oh yes, there's a Messiah and there's a land of Israel that we're supposed to come back to, we always seem to forget. If you think about it, this happened in Poland, when the Jewish people ironically said, Polin, Poland. In Hebrew, here we will stay, here we will rest. Or it happened in Germany, in the Weimar Republic. For many generations, the Jews in Germany settled in very nicely, and then that ended. It happened in Spain. There was the golden age of Spain, where the Jews were the prime ministers, the viceroys of Spain. It's happening in America. In America, it's the golden Medina. People thought this is the Medina that we need. We don't need to go back to the actual Medina, the actual city, the actual country that is ours, Medinat Israel. We can go to the golden Medina. That's good enough for us. America is still, Baruch Hashem, at its zenith, but we'll see. Even there, the Jewish people will not stay forever. When it comes to Egypt, we know that they stayed there for hundreds of years. And yet, in the end, they needed to leave. But where did it all go wrong? And that, I think, we find in our parasha. If you look at our parasha, there's one word that jumped out to me this week when I was reading it. And I thought, that looks interesting. If you look at our parasha, you will find two psukim in which a certain phrase is mentioned. We find, Vayoshev Yosef et aviv et echav, and Yosef settled his father and his brothers, Vayiten lehem achuzah be'eretz Mitzrayim. And he gave them an achuzah. What is an achuzah? An achuzah means an estate. But in actual Hebrew, the word itself has a deeper meaning. Le'echoz means to grasp, means to hold on to, means to settle down, to set in roots. The Jewish people settled in, as we see from the end of the parasha, the very last pasuk. It says, Vayeshav Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim, be'eretz Goshen, and the Jewish people settled down into Egypt, into the land of Goshen, Vaye'achazu ba, and they held on to it, and they dug in. Vayifru vayirbu meod, and indeed they were very successful. This is a pasuk that could be said about every single exile that the Jews went to. At a certain stage, they managed to settle down, put down some roots, became part of the establishment, they became settled, they became comfortable, and they succeeded, Baruch Hashem. And yet, we all know how the story of Egypt ends. It ends in blood, sweat, and tears. What went wrong? I would like to argue that they used the exact term that was not supposed to be used for Galut, but rather was supposed to be used for Israel. As we see, indeed, that Hashem tells Abraham that in Brit Milah, we find, V'akimoti et briti beni uvenecha, and I shall set up my covenant between me and you, uben zaracha acharecha ledorotam brit olam. This will be an eternal covenant between you and your descendants and God. Liot lecha leEloim ulezarcha acharecha, v'natati lecha ulezarcha acharecha et eretz megurecha, and I will give you and your descendants this land, et kol eretz Canaan, the whole land of Canaan, le'achuzat olam. Israel is supposed to be the achuzah, not Egypt, not Europe, not America. Israel is the achuzah. If you do achuzah outside of Israel, you might succeed for a few generations. You might have a good few hundred years of prosperity, of success, of happiness, of calm and peace and happy Jewish life. But it's not the real achuzah. It's not an achuzat olam. It's not the real home base. The real home base is Israel. That is and always shall be the one place where Jews are supposed to settle. This is our achuzah. Everything else is galut. Galut is exile. Galut is gerut. It's to be a stranger. Ger yezarcha be'eretz lo lahem. As Abraham was told in Brit B'nai B'tarim, your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land. As long as we're strangers and foreign in exile, we will survive because we'll be able to move on to our real achuzah. If we decide to misunderstand exile, to settle down in exile, to think that we can actually survive long-term in exile, that's when it all goes wrong. So that is a message I think we can learn from this week's parasha. Bezrat Hashem, I give us all a bracha, that we think forward and learn from the past for the sakes of the future, to not settle down in exile, but to put our roots into more real, futuristic, safe, home-based lands, which is Israel. And Bezrat Hashem, the Jewish people, no one ever said it would be easy here, but it is long-term. Achuzat Olam. Shabbat Shalom.